I'm very concerned that our society is much more interested in information than wonder, in noise rather than silence. How do we do that? I mean, in our business, yours and mine, how do we encourage reflection? Oh my, this is a noisy world.
I was driving up to Dallas from Austin a few months ago. I'd gotten a call that my mother was sick and needed someone to take care of her. Most of the time, the next few weeks, I found myself more or less alone in the house I grew up in. In those long, quiet hours, I came across a unique internet event. On a website called Twitch, Mr. Rogers was being broadcast in its entirety. Here was this iconic man in black and white, young, glowing with optimism and a steady discipline. The format of the show was almost identical to what I remembered growing up in the 1990s. To my surprise, I watched the whole thing with fascination. And then I watched another episode. And then another one. I was drawn completely into Fred's world, the neighborhood.
This is my friend Jeff Erlinger. He's one of my neighbors here, and I asked him if he would come by today because I wanted you to meet him, and I wanted you to see his electric wheelchair.
I'm told that I watched the show growing up, like most American children born between the late 60s and the mid-90s, but I honestly couldn't say I had much of a grasp on what Fred Rogers was all about. Like a lot of people, I just had vague memories of a kind man, memories not unlike those of visiting my grandfather, but captured by this marathon and watching decades of this man's work and passion pass by over the following weeks. I was deeply moved. At the core of Fred Rogers' work is a depth of thoughtfulness, a patient discipline, and a sincerity that transcends anything else in television history. Fish just swimming back and forth, up and down. Oh, what's that right down there? Take a look at the aquarium. Do you see a dead fish? Mr. Rogers' work was all about demonstration. It was about showing children virtuous behavior, compassion, trustful, quiet goodness, by modeling it himself. The secret power of Mr. Rogers' show was that he didn't have to say these things. He only had to show them by embodying the kind of person who should be in a child's life. His sincerity has a transcendent quality. In a world that is now so completely dominated by irony and cynicism, Mr. Rogers adopted a kind of radical goodness. And it's all too easy to dismiss this sort of demeanor as naive or old-fashioned. But when you hear Fred speak about the importance of his choices and the depth of insight that he developed in thinking about how to build a relationship with children through the television medium, it becomes difficult not to take him more seriously.
You know, I have a little plaque beside my chair upstairs in the office that says, "What is essential is invisible to the eye." That may sound like something strange for somebody who works in television, but the older I get, the more important I know that is. It seems to me, Charlie, that the things that are center stage are rarely the things that are the most important. It's usually what happens over in the wings.
This idea of valuing what is invisible to the eye is something that is really fascinating when you consider the medium Mr. Rogers is working in. As a storyteller in a visual medium, he's chosen to put all his emphasis on human connection, on sincere emotional exchanges, and on a quietness, a stillness, a meditative approach that has its own hypnotic quality. In theory, this should not work well in a medium like cinema or television, but Fred Rogers executes it with a supreme confidence. Watching his show in the late 60s or late 90s, the only thing that has really changed is the passage of time on the man. The format remains steadfast. That's because fundamentally, Fred doesn't believe you need spectacle to create a meaningful human connection on screen, and positive human connections are at the heart of his work.
But you're able to talk about those things.
Yeah.
So well, and help other people who might have the same kinds of things. Do you know that song that I sometimes sing called It's You I Like? I'd like to sing that to you and with you.
Okay, sure.
It's you I like. It's not the things you wear. It's not the way you do your hair. But it's you I like, the way you are right now, the way down deep inside you, not the things that
hide you,
not your fancy chair, that's just beside you, but it's you I like, every part of you, your skin, your eyes, your feelings, whether old or new. I hope that you'll remember, even when you're feeling blue, that it's you I like, it's you yourself, it's you, it's you I like. And it is you I like, Jeff.
From 1968 to 2001, the show aired 895 episodes. That's 418 hours of television. And while oftentimes the topics were simple interactions between adults or investigations into everyday objects, the show wasn't afraid to explore difficult topics in emotionally honest ways. In 1971, Mr. Rogers explored the topic of death through the famous episode, The Death of a Goldfish.
When I was very young, I had a dog that I loved very much. Her name was Mitzi. And she got to be old, and she died. And I was very sad when she died, because she and I were good pals. And when she died, I cried. And my grandmother heard me crying, I remember, and she came and she just put her arm around me because she knew I was sad. She knew how much I loved that dog. And my dad said we'd have to bury Mitzi. And I didn't want to. I didn't want to bury her because I thought I'd just pretend that she was still alive. But my dad said that her body was dead and we'd have to bury her. So we did.
There are two things here that fascinate me. First is the way Fred is using his own emotional vulnerability to model for children what grief is. He opens himself up to the audience in a way that feels completely truthful. It's a great example of his unique gift for speaking directly to you through the screen, not to an audience or a crowd. And here, he uses that connection to demonstrate, not explain, how grief affects us as people. The second thing I admire is the silence that is allowed to exist, the lack of cutting, the long pause, the stillness. This is characteristic of most of the show. But one has to imagine it would be nerve-wracking to craft something this still, especially if you knew your audience were young children. Fred never doubts that stillness and silence are his most powerful and essential tools, and he uses them masterfully, bringing us to a magical place in these moments of silence and stillness.
What do you think we can do, those of us who are purveyors of this television medium? What can we do to encourage people to have more quiet in their lives, to more silence? Real revelation comes through silence.
My aunt and uncle gave me a toy dog, like this, that I used to play with. I used to make it go like this, and then make it pop up again like that. Pretending. Even now, I can still remember Mitzi's prickly fur and her curly tail. She had a tail that went around like that. Would you like to see a picture of her? I think I have one in the drawer here. There she is. My dog Mitzi.
How many kids do you think are out there who in 30 years you've influenced, who you've made a difference in and made them feel something special?
I don't care how many, even if it's just one. We get so wrapped up in numbers in our society, and the most important thing is that we're able to be one-to-one, you and I, with each other at the moment. If we can be present to the moment with the person that we happen to be with at the moment, that's what's important.
What touches me most as a filmmaker about Fred Rogers' work is this question of silence and specificity. Our cinema, and even our television, is so preoccupied with spectacle. We are obsessed with maximizing our reach to capture the biggest demographic of audience possible, the largest box office returns, the most views and shares. Fred wasn't interested in these sort of metrics. He found a way to work that was totally against the grain of the medium and the culture, yet his work resonated. I don't know how specifically we as filmmakers can learn from that, but there is something inspiring about hearing someone like Fred talk about finding satisfaction in reaching a single viewer. For Fred, this was all about depth and integrity. It was about silence because silence is essential, and if that meant only one person was affected by his work, that was enough for him.
Please welcome Jeffrey Erlanger. It is hard. I'm so glad to see you. Oh, thank you for coming. My pleasure. Oh. It is, what a surprise. It's an honor to be here tonight, to be part of your proud moment. This proud moment, you know, when you tell people that it's you I like, we know that you really mean it. And tonight, I want to let you know that on behalf of millions of children and grown-ups, it is you that I like.